Hello, and welcome again to AI Ramblings, episode 25. Neal, we are at the big 2-5, and we've again got a lot of exciting things to talk about. And I want to just, one underlying theme I just want to highlight for today's show. We're talking about a bunch of topics, but the one common thread through a lot of the things we're going to talk about is video. And you'll get what I'm saying in a minute. But I wanted to underline that because the internet has dramatically changed because of YouTube and TikTok, etc. Now AI is changing all of that dramatically. A bunch of things that have happened in the news this week, and also some of the other topics that we're going to talk about is about how video is getting fundamentally transformed by AI. So I just wanted to um, uh, underline that common thread through all of this. But I think the big news story of the week that we should kick off with is OpenAI again. They've been on a tear. Last week, episode 24, we talked about how they've just been on a phenomenal tear of announcements, over $1 trillion of AI capex investments and partnerships with everybody from NVIDIA to Oracle and this week we saw Broadcom, which is another multi-$100 billion set of partnerships in terms of building alternative inference chips that would run independent of what they already are partnered with NVIDIA on, etc. And so the company is very much focused on really scaling up their ability to generate just extraordinary amounts of data center compute measured in quadrillions of intelligence tokens and the power to make it all run. So multiple gigawatts of power, which again, as we've talked about, and again, we'll have a lot of discussion on this in terms of our posts on this in the show notes. There's a lot of detail that you can jump in on. But this deal, again, is another one that continues to punctuate almost daily. It feels like how much of a ramp they are relative to their peers, Anthropic, Meta, Elon's XAI, Google, of course, and Amazon and others. And then that's not to mention any of the overseas companies in China, in Europe, etc., that are also on a infrastructure building scaling mission. But OpenAI continues to be kind of heads and shoulders above all of them. The second news item of the week is something that by itself, it sounds like, oh, okay, it's just another corporate deal. But if you take a couple of steps back, it kind of highlights another big competition that's going on the video front. And it specifically has to do with Spotify announcing a podcast partnership deal with Netflix. Now, Netflix, and I've talked a lot about this on previous shows. Netflix, if you look at internet video today, there's basically a barbell. You've got Google, YouTube on this one end with a couple of billion users for both their YouTube channel on a global basis and YouTube TV, which is essentially reinventing cable over here. And then Netflix, which is original programming, basically really regurgitating Hollywood in a global format for video across the world. In the middle, Spotify, which invested heavily 3-4 years ago on the podcast format with big podcasters like Joe Rogan, etc., and kind of pioneered the audio podcast space, has seen that whole category superseded by video. YouTube has basically taken the crown, and we've written a lot about this and talked about this in terms of video podcasts. Today, most of the podcasts that are consumed are video. Video is the fastest growing category versus audio. That's not to say audio is not important, but video is the big one. And Spotify is at a bit of a disadvantage here. And this is why they're partnering with Netflix, which is the other end of this barbell. And the plan, in the announcement is to have a whole series of video podcasts programming for the next 18 to 24 months. And there's a actually pretty impressive list of some of the programs, many of which you might be very familiar with, that we can talk about. The third piece of news we want to talk about is a continuation of the AI-generated algorithmic feeds that we saw really make a splash about a week ago with OpenAI announcing Sora 2, their Sora 2 app, which has become the number one app on the Apple App Store and is giving a run for its money against companies like Meta with Reels. But Meta also has its version of that called Vibes, which is AI-generated content feeds. And Google also, they are also in the race, not just with their YouTube Shorts, but also things like Nano Banana, which we talked about a few weeks ago. And so that whole cluster of AI video generation is now colliding, as you would expect, with content and copyright holders. And in particular, there was a news story about how estates of celebrities, Robin Williams, a whole bunch of other celebrities, are now coming to the fore and saying, hey, our intellectual property is being appropriated by millions of users to create AI generated slop without permission and without compensation. So this again adds to the bucket of issues and litigation that's going on around content, fair use, a very complex set of topics. These are ongoing negotiations that are going on with the LLM companies, not just for video, but for text. Prior to this, you saw a few weeks ago, Anthropic took a chunk of money of the 8-9 billion that they've raised, about 1.5 billion, and signed a deal with a bunch of book publishers and paid some penalties that they owed on how they had taken a bunch of books and used that to train their models. So this is a continuation on that spectrum. And celebrity estates is a key piece now of the AI video piece. It's a news item by itself, but it's part of a broader picture that I think is important to kind of think about. And it's a broad array of issues. And then the last, so those will be the top 3 news topics. And then we have a major topic, which I'll get to after we discuss these news topics. Video is front and center for you, Neil. So I'm sure you have a
Video is
few
front
things
and
to
center.
add here.
Yeah, video is front and center, and I guess I can start at the end of what we talked about there with the whole battle with a lot of the estates and AI and repurposing these figures that have passed away in modern media. There was an incident a couple of years ago with one of the DC movies that had come out, The Flash, where there's a scene at the end. Spoiler alert if anyone hasn't seen it. It's not that good of a movie, so if you haven't seen it, it's fine. But it's essentially a scene at the end where they bring back a lot of old characters and they brought back Christopher Reeve, who obviously passed away a number of years ago, and they recreated him with a variety of VFX tools, AI being one of the things that was used to kind of create that model of the character. And there was a lot of backlash just because it wasn't done in good taste. I think that's a lot of the issue with these recreations of people is a lot of the times they're just executed as a cash grab, especially with the way Hollywood is right now. I feel like it's run on nostalgia and bringing back characters and people from the past, as you can see with a lot of the movies that are coming out now. But I think this whole AI trend of AI slop is kind of perpetuating that in a bit where earlier I think these tools would only be available to big VFX studios. And now with things like Sora, you can really bring anyone back into the fray and generate videos with them, which is a little concerning just because of the guardrails that have been set in place and, there being a lot of maybe misuse of the technologies. So that is one thing I wanted to highlight. Regarding the Spotify thing with Netflix, I don't think it comes as a surprise. As you said, Spotify has been interesting the way that they've adapted their UI as well on the phone. They've kind of moved to a more TikTok-like experience where there's podcasts and there's clips, and they're trying to add more video into the fray. As you pointed out correctly, I think audio only is just not the best way now with the way people's attention spans are being kind of morphed with short form video. So it's smart on Spotify's point, and hopefully they'll be able to generate unique content because Spotify's, of course, when you kind of break it into the format of the app itself. Most people access it on their phone, and it's vertical. It's not horizontal. And of course, most videos watched horizontally. So how does long form podcast kind of translate onto an app like Spotify? I think there's a lot of unique design challenges that hopefully they think through when they're implementing that. But yeah, it's a lot of interesting movements, and it's just so much so fast nowadays. I think it's
No,
some great stuff for
exactly.
this week.
You mentioned Christopher Reeve. I remember. I mean, one of the things that was going through my feeds was Stephen Hawking. I'm a physics nut and a big Stephen Hawking fan. And one of the things that's been going through in my TikTok and other places is this Stephen Hawking in a wheelchair doing these
Yeah,
extreme sports loopity loops,
yeah, it's insane.
which is fun and funny to watch, but at the same time, you know, some people can
Yeah.
take the other side of that.
Yeah.
That's not good taste. Did they get permission? No. Those kinds of issues. But that is where the world we're heading, and all of these companies right now are attacking this in a move fast, break things. Ask for forgiveness later kind of mode, as exemplified by some of the blog posts that OpenAI founder Sam Altman has put out. If you read his posts, pre and post the launch of Sora 2, it's almost like we're going to do this. And then, if you guys have any objections to this, come and talk to us. And guess what? Everyone is coming in, but they knew that going in, and they're ready with big checkbook if they need it, lawyers if they need it. It's going to be a tussle, and it's the beginning of the beginning of these kinds of issues. And so this is going to be a thing that we're going to talk about a lot going forward, especially as we go into AI, all this experimentation with AI generated video. And I dare say, even Sora 2 being the top of the App Store, it's interesting. The only reason this stuff is not even bigger right now is they don't have enough compute. OpenAI doesn't have enough data centers because the thing is still on invitation only. Most people who want to try it haven't tried it. And this is huge computation intensive. So if you want to connect what's going on the video stuff that we're talking about with all the multi-$100 billion deals that seem to be almost every day, that's how they're connected. They need to build these things, these data centers, and they're not going to be able to build them in months. That it's going to be 2 or 3 years. So this is a long-term picture, and it's going to be part of the landscape that we're going to talk about for a little bit. So a lot of stuff going on in this bucket of news, which we have some topics later on that again come back to some other elements of this topic. But I wanted to move us to the main topic of today, which is AI robotics. This has been an area we've talked about a little bit in prior episodes. There's almost a space race going on here. We've talked about it. I've written a lot about in terms of look, LLM AIs are about the digital side of using large language models, chat GPT, voice modality, etc. But there is the huge, also multi-trillion-dollar opportunity in what's called physical AI. AI for robotics. We've talked about how solving data acquisition issues in for robots is a big issue. You and I showed some videos a few episodes ago. We'll put it in the show notes of NVIDIA doing a lot of work in terms of simulation technology to generate synthetic data for robots. The reason we're bringing it up as a major topic this week is there were some reports which I wrote about, basically updating where the U.S. is on AI robotics, and it's ramping up both for business, commercial use, and consumer use in the US, very, very nascent. And then China is much further ahead because they have obviously a huge manufacturing ecosystem in Shenzhen and other places that can make these robots at scale. And they're big companies, like Unitree are making a lot of progress. But the good news is that a lot of the US companies, large, medium, and small, are also working aggressively on this front. We just saw this week Meta lost its head of Optimus AI robotics Tesla lost their head of Optimus robotics to Meta, and this fellow named Ashish, and he actually went for less money to Meta for a bunch of reasons that we're not clear on. But the point is, this is a white hot area of competition, not just in terms of the US and China, but also most of the US companies. Amazon is probably one of the largest deployers of robots in their warehouses, as an example. Google has been very active here. Meta, as I mentioned, is ramping up in terms of humanoid robots. And then all of these companies are also trying to figure out home robots, not just humanoid robots that hopefully someday will fold our laundry, etc., but also smart home type of hubs. And I think you have a topic later on this broadcast on what Apple is potentially planning on some of this as well. So very active area, and it's in the news. We had a couple of big pieces that were out, which will be highlighted in the show notes. So do take a look at that. But again, the other thing is on robots. Early days. You're going to be the beneficiary of this over the next 20 years, and even more so than people like me, because a lot of the stuff, the robots are exciting, but they're not at the smartphone phase. You will likely see the full richness of the space,
Yeah,
in 10 to 20 plus years. So it's very exciting. What do you think?
for sure. No, I think robotics is an area, I guess I'll kind of spoil my burning question at the end of it, but I've been focusing a bit on just Hollywood and media and the role that's played in a lot of the technologies that we've been going through in this new wave, and robotics is one, of course, science fiction loves to paint this idea of robotics and how they interact with us and stuff. The fact that a lot of these things are starting to come to fruition is great, but once again, as you underlined, it is early days. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. I'm going to talk about it a bit in a second here on my reading obsession of the week, with some of what Apple is promising soon in the home area. In the end of the day, it's great that these things are coming to fruition, but a lot of it comes down to the software and the way that people are able to interact with it, and a lot of the social engineering that goes into the interacting with these humanoid, robots. We've talked a lot about the anthropomorphizing of these systems, and a lot of the controversy that's come up with that, with people treating them like real people. And yeah, I mean,
Why don't we
it's
segue
fascinating.
to your read of the week, because it's actually a natural progression, because that
Yeah.
is the next topic. So go ahead.
Yeah. So my read of the week is it's a report from our favorite Mark Gurman of Bloomberg, talking about Apple's tabletop robot and home hub updates. So it's something we talked about a couple episodes ago, that Apple's been fast to work and a full overhaul of their home accessories. Currently they just have the HomePod, and there's been a long rumored display hub to come to rival what Google has, Amazon has, and this is going to be coming soon, according to Mark, alongside a long-standing project that Apple's had. They actually shifted a lot of their resources off of the recently scrapped Apple Car to work on this Apple Home robot, which will act almost like a Pixar lamp, as what's been reported. If anyone's familiar with the famous Pixar opening lamp from the credit sequence, something with a hinge that's able to swivel around and follow people around a room. So the report gives an update on that. I think this is less about the report, but more about this conversation that we've been having a lot off air about a lot of our frustrations with these home intelligence systems. I know you had a piece earlier this week about the updates in this space, especially how AI plays into it with Ring and Nest. We even got updates as of last week to our Google Home set up here at the house. We have the doorbell, we have the cameras, we have the speakers. Now, when you open up the Google Home app, they've completely changed the UI, where they've added almost ChatGPT like interface, where you're able to just ask natural language questions to get updates on things. But I think people love to jump to new gadgets and these shiny new things that Apple and a lot of these other people announce, but it's an issue that we've discussed for a while, and we even actually had an unplanned example of it in our last episode, where I think until these companies really figure out the software of it, and a lot of these wake words especially, I think it's going to be something that needs to be thought through with care. Hopefully we'll see Apple and a lot of these companies start to implement it in these new generation devices, because in the end of the day, if we're not able to talk to these things in a natural way without being a hindrance, because right now it feels like a lot of these things are a bit of a hindrance rather than a help. Perception of change, I think, comes with an improvement on that side of things in terms of use cases. And so that's kind of why I wanted to highlight it as my read of the week, just to kind of open up that conversation a bit as to where the space is going and maybe things that need to be kept in mind.
No, I think these are going to be great experiments to watch, and they're going to ask a lot of us, because, by the way, you've got the Apple experiments. Amazon has had their versions of small home robots as well. We've had Japan. So Sony has been in this market for over 20 years. Most people don't think of this. I used to collect their Aibo robotic dogs for over 20 years. And they were more expensive than the Apple Vision Pro, which you remember, a year ago was, all the rage in terms of, oh my God, $500. Are you kidding me? And Apple just announced an upgraded version of the Vision Pro with the M5 chip, also 3,500. But these are expensive things, even the Apple ones and Amazon, they're going to be a few $1,000s, and potentially even more if these tariff things continue, supply chain issues continue. So these are all really nice to have experiments. So everyone is trying to figure out what to do with this stuff. So these are technical novelties, and they're clashing with our imaginations of what robots are, especially humanoid ones. And from my perspective, I think the jury's out in terms of humanoid robots. I think it's a great idea that we've been enamored with science fiction, Data in Star Trek, and the Jetsons, Rosie the robot, etc. But it's not entirely clear that those are the methodologies that we're going to find most effective for robots that are AI driven. And consider that over the last 15 to 20 years, the chief robotic innovators, entrepreneurs, and companies over the last 15 to 20 years, the best they could do with robots that were machine language driven were vacuum cleaners, our Roombas. And they look nothing like humanoids. And there's nothing to say that, the robots that we'll see over the next 10 or 15 years are necessarily going to be, Arnold Schwarzenegger like, but, devices. So a lot of things are up in the air. And then on top of that, you got, of course, OpenAI with Johnny Ive, no less, partnered with devices. And there are some hints out there because we know very little of that because if people are guessing whether it's a pendant or puck-like device. But there is a mobility aspect that's also been hinted at, where the thing moves around at home, etc. So a lot of experimentation on robots, but super early days. So we need to temper that. But the global capital markets, the way they are, there's a lot of enthusiasm for this. Investors, public and private, are bidding up the value of these companies, and there is no other company to see for that as an example than Tesla, which at $1.4 trillion market cap is not trading like a car company. Their car business Tesla is, down 7% versus General Motors EV sales up 107% this year, and Ford up 20%. And if you value Tesla as just an auto company, it should be worth less than 300 billion because the largest auto company in the world is Toyota at 250. So what I'm saying is there's over $1 trillion of valuation in Tesla for two things. Number one is robotics, Optimus, and again they lost their chief technical lead on that to Meta. And then the second thing is robotaxis, which we've talked about, which are robots on wheels in a different way. We don't think of them as humanoid robots, but similar idea. Again, very early, but the market is leaning in. So valuations are very rich. AI bubble talk is in the air. Everyone is basically talking about that. But that's the environment we're in, and so this is our major topic of the week for that reason. And I'm glad you pointed out that in your read of the week. My read of the week is actually a continuation of this video theme that we've talked about. There's a great piece which I will put up in the show notes, written by Derek Thompson, who's a very good writer and has his own Substack on AI matters, Atlantic and other places. But he wrote a very good piece that basically is highlighting that video, everything, all kinds of content is essentially getting converted to video over the last 10 or 20 years. We saw that in television with reality TV. We've seen that with YouTube and TikTok and Netflix in a great way. Now AI is turbocharging all of this, taking it from scarcity to abundance. And so there is a notion that almost everything we 3, 4, 5 billion of us on the planet online are consuming, we are increasingly being algorithmically programmed to consume it in little bits of video feeds, doom scrolling, etc. And what does that mean for society? What does that mean for impact on our minds across age spectrum, young to old? And these are big questions, and this piece kind of summarizes a lot of that as a thought piece. So I think it's a very good piece to kind of save for the weekend and go through. So that's my read of the week, which takes us to our obsessions of the week.
Yeah. Yeah,
Neal?
mine's a little different for this week, but it has to do with this whole idea of podcasting and streaming and video that's kind of shown up. So mine is something I recently found out about. I might have been a bit late to the trend, but it's this show that's called TBPN. It's essentially like if
Tech Bros.
ESPN and LinkedIn had a child. It stands for Technology Business Programming Network, and it's essentially a 3-hour live stream that treats tech and business news and even career moves, as you've seen with a lot of these big name trades, as you'll say it, from people jumping from OpenAI to Meta and Meta to Tesla and back and forth. They cover the play-by-play excitement of what would be sports, but in the context of technology. And it appeals to a lot of people nowadays just because there's so much money in this, and the perception around tech and what it means to be a tech pro and a nerd has changed because these are jobs that are paying the equivalent of athlete salaries. I think it's cool. I've watched a couple of episodes. I think it's great just because they structure it in a way that covers all things, whether it's social media and the effects of AI and a lot of these moves on that. But They have a recently modest like size of an audience, but the most interesting thing is they've had a lot of cool guests on. So they've had people like Mark Zuckerberg and a lot of the other AI names in the space come on. And yeah, it just kind of builds onto this whole culture that's being formed, but even things like poly market and the prediction markets. This idea of tech pros and all that being given a voice in this space and having a spot to kind of showcase that in the form of a show here. So it's great. I encourage anyone to go and check it out. But it was new to me, so I thought I'd share.
No, I think it's a good obsession of the week. And again, those two, and I've been a fan of their show, and their presentation is very live, with a lot of statistics and so on. And again, it goes to this business that you were talking about, prediction markets. I did another podcast. We'll put up the link in our show as well with Howard Linzen, our mutual friend, who we did Trends with Friends, and we talk about prediction markets and how popular that is through things like Polymarket and Kalshi. And it's young people who are laying into this in a big way. Is a big part of the culture, and it's being converted into video, real time programming. So all of these trends and markets are blending again into one, which is an interesting phenomenon. So it is a good topic for an obsession of the week. And which ties into my obsession of the week, which is, as you know, I've been very anti humanization of AI. There's this business of anthropomorphizing AI in a big way. And this week, so I watch very closely for all kinds of indications on this, both leaning into this and leaning away from it. And this week we saw more leaning into it. OpenAI Sam Altman announced that they're planning a Chat GPT version with a personality that people like of GPT 4.0. So that's one element. So they're going to lean into more personalization because people like the friendly tone of their AI, and sometimes obsequious and so on. And so these are catering to people's predilection to treat these things as almost human, which I think is a long-term mistake. But it's normal because that's how we humans relate to everything. Think about how we relate to our pets, cats and dogs. And so this continues. And then Sam also took it up a notch, basically after criticizing Elon a few weeks ago for more adult content on his Grok service that had these erotic anime personalities. He did say that after they perfect some guardrails on ChatGPT and age verification checks, that this type of content would also be allowed on ChatGPT. So this is another trend that is accelerating because we're in a very competitive space right now where all of the big LLM companies, their next big battle they know is to get tens of millions and hundreds of millions of users. So again, just do things, break things, and ask for forgiveness later. And so almost every major new technology has seen some sort of adult content be a driver in its early days, and AI is going to be no different. So we're going to see this humanization taken at every extreme in this case. Stay tuned, as they say, in terms of that type of
Yeah.
content as well. So, which brings us to the end of our show and our burning questions for each other. And Neil, I'll kick it off to you. Given everything we've talked about, especially your read of the week on TVPN, what are some of the favorite podcasts that you and your friends like to watch?
Yeah.
That are part of your regular routine.
Yeah, there's a few. This is one that, I watch often. There's a couple friends from engineering and all that watch it. Maybe it doesn't appeal to a broader audience as much, but things like MKBHD's Waveform and of course the Vergecast are things that come to the top of my mind. Watch them a lot. But there's a couple others. I know like a lot of people my age tend to tune into, the Joe Rogans and like Friedman's and that type just because of the variety of guests and stuff. But I think there's a growing kind of affection for podcasts in like this tech specific area, but kind of in the vein of this whole TBPN thing. Walkesh Patel is one that I've been watching a lot more recently. He has a lot of great guests on, especially in tech and AI, and a lot of great interviews in that area. The New York Times has a great opinion podcast as well that I tune into every now and then. But yeah, Podcasting is an area that I've kind of delved into a bit more recently. I want to get into it more. So if anyone has any good suggestions for podcasts, also feel free to drop them in the comments or something.
Yes, please do. Of course, after watching AI Ramblings as your favorite
Yes.
podcast, and then,
Yes.
like and subscribe. So I love it. So, Neil, why don't you take us to the end with
Yeah.
your question for
So
me?
my burning question is a bit of a packed one, but it mostly has to do with something I talked about a bit earlier. You come to realize that, the role that Hollywood and media over the years has played in kind of portraying technology and a lot of these AI use cases, of course, with movies as old as 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is one of our favorites, and then newer ones like Her that come to the top of people's minds. Even things like The Truman Show, which have to do with like surveillance and reality TV. I guess the question I wanted to ask, and there's not a solid answer for this, but just wanted to kind of see your thoughts on it is, given the role that Hollywood has played, maybe the perception that's been painted in the public a bit, the impact of that. How do you see that not getting reversed? But do you think the damage has been done? Is that something that you think can be remedied over time to change people's perception on a lot of these, new emergent human-like, as a lot of people unfortunately like to paint it as, technologies such as AI? Or do you think this is something that's kind of been embedded into the cultural landscape for a long time now?
Are you talking about in terms of how Hollywood would deal with these AI technologies?
Yeah.
Look, I think as a set of tools, they're experimenting with it. The OpenAIs of the world have been very proactive, and I know for a fact that they've spent a lot of time with all the big studios and so on. And the technologies are at the early stages, and we're seeing how far they've come. A year ago, a few shows ago, we talked about the video with First Sora. There was no audio. Now it's audio. Now they're 10, 15, 20 seconds. For me, it's very analogous to, I remember, when I was head of Goldman Internet, meeting Steve Jobs in the mid 90s. This is not in his Apple capacity. This was when he was running a little company called Pixar, and he showed me the first clips of Toy Story, a year and a half before it was released. And these were like 5 or 10 minute clips. And you watched it and you saw how amazing, it was a storytelling, Hollywood had put in the same effort using these technology tools to tell stories that were as compelling as anything we saw with human actors. And it was extraordinary. And you knew it was going to be a huge success. So it was fun to kind of be at the front edge to watch that. And literally a year later, Toy Story became actually the first fully digitally animated feature film. And the rest, as they say, is history. And Pixar is now part of Disney. And Steve Jobs ended up making his first billions off that set of innovations than he did off Apple. So what we're looking at with AI is the same kind of thing. It's going to be creative destruction that we'll see, and so it'll be ebb and flow, and it's all very exciting. But it's a remaking of an industry. So that's on the storytelling side of things in terms of AI. And then the other part of Hollywood that is also being impacted, as I mentioned before, Hollywood pioneered, live programming, broadcast news shows, reality shows, entertainment shows. All of those are being reconstructed with AI now, not just by Hollywood, but by tens, if not hundreds of millions of influencers and the creative economy, which is on its way to being over $500 billion industry over the next year and a half. So in many ways, much bigger than Hollywood. So if anything, all of this stuff basically expands the market for entertainment and news and stories and everything on a global basis. And then the last thing I'll just say is that we think of Hollywood as US. And certainly 20 years ago when I was doing internet things, the internet was mostly 80% in the US. Today, 80% is global. So we're going to see a huge, 4 or 5 billion people basically recreate what we think of as Hollywood in their backyards. And so all of this is very, very exciting. And there's going to be, again, a lot of new stuff, expanded markets, and contraction of older markets. So very exciting. And you and your generation have a lot to look forward to on this front.
We do.
Anyway, great burning question. Thank you. And with that, I think we'll conclude our episode 25. Again, I wanted to thank everybody for joining us. As usual, please, any comments, feedback, please share and like and subscribe. And as always, stay tuned. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. See you next time. Thanks.